Thank you. The gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I want to start by saying I'm disappointed that the President's budget request and recent regulatory actions from the Department have failed to adequately support and protect workers. In December of 2017, the Department proposed a rule to allow employers to keep and control how to redistribute workers' tips. A report from the Economic Policy Institute it estimated that if the proposed rule were finalized, workers would lose about $5.8 billion a year in tips, nearly 80% of which would have been taken from women working in tipped jobs. Last year, Bloomberg Law reported that as part of the notice of proposed rulemaking, your department prepared and then withheld an economic analysis quantifying the loss of tipped income for tipped workers. Shortly after that report, I joined Chairman Scott and two of my colleagues. We sent you a letter requesting a copy of each draft, interim proposed or completed economic analysis in connection with or related to the proposed rule, and we have yet to receive a substantive response. Then in March of 2018, Bloomberg Law reported that the department convinced OMB Director Mulvaney to release the proposed rule without sharing that quantitative analysis that your department prepared, even though it was available. As you're aware, the department's Office of Inspector General is now investigating the agency's process in crafting the proposed rule. Have you provided that economic analysis that the Department of Labor conducted on the proposed rule to the OIG?
Congresswoman, we have provided, and we have been working with the OIG so that they have appropriate material for their investigation. As you're aware, the OIG has authority to look at documents within the department, and we are working with the OIG on
Have you
matter.
provided the economic analysis that the Department of Labor conducted on the proposed rule to the OIG?
Congresswoman, we are working with the OIG so that the OIG has whatever documents it deems necessary.
Okay, so in other words, you're not answering the question.
Congresswoman, what I am saying is that we have provided the OIG what it has requested, and it is reviewing that. So I imagine that it is not for me to review what the OIG has requested. If the OIG has requested it.
I'm not asking you to review that. I'm just asking you if you provided them with the economic analysis, which is a yes or no question.
And Congresswoman, what I'm saying is the OIG, as any investigator would, I'm sure has asked for a series of documents. We have worked with them so that they have the documents they need. If that is among those
I'm going to assume that your answer is no. Will you commit to being more transparent about the adverse effects of proposed rules for workers in the future?
Congresswoman, I believe I have been quite transparent. As a matter of fact, I addressed this at a hearing previously where I laid out one of the issues with this. This was a notice of proposed rulemaking, not a final rule. It was a notice of proposed rulemaking where the prior notice did not have an economic analysis, and where one of the difficulties is and I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but if I could, Congressman, because this is important. I
know it's important, but I'm going to reclaim my time because I have another question. Recently, I chaired a hearing on persistent gender-based wage discrimination, and we heard witnesses describe the heavy burden of proof for holding employers accountable. And one of the challenges in enforcing anti-discrimination laws and proving a pay disparity is identifying an employee of the opposite sex in an equal position who's paid more. So the House recently passed the Paycheck Fairness Act to try to close that loophole. The Department's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, or OFCCP, has an obligation to audit federal contractors for pay discrimination. And in the past, Directive 307 allowed the OFCCP to decide which workers could be considered in making that determination about whether they were doing the same job. But unfortunately, last year, the department rescinded that directive and implemented a new policy that allows employers to decide which workers should be compared. Now, that's pretty concerning that the department is allowing the contractors to sort of shape the outcome of their own audits. The wage gap persists in nearly every line of work, regardless of education, experience, occupation, industry, or job. So do you agree that detecting pay discrimination and closing the wage gap affects the lives of working families?
Congresswoman, first I would say that your characterization of the department's actions are just factually incorrect. At no point has the department said that employers can determine which employees are looked at, and I just don't think that's an accurate characterization of what the department
department
did.
didn't-
But ultimately, going to your question, yes, I do agree that it is important to eliminate wage disparities.
And do you agree that OFCCP's audits are one way to detect pay discrimination?
Yes, I do.
And do you agree that the department rescinded Directive 307?
Congresswoman, I don't have the numbers of the directives on the top of my head, but we did attempt to provide more transparency to the employer as to what categories of employees we would be looking at.
I would appreciate a follow-up on whether Directive 307 was rescinded, and I'm out of time, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.